and say, this is going to happen. I got into trouble in one mediation because I said to the American party, when I speak Indonesian, I have to smile a lot.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people think I'm angry. And after the mediation, I got feedback from the lawyer saying, my client was quite upset, Raymond, because you kept smiling with them and you never smiled at him. So it's like you try and prep people and you still can't get it right. So what do you do?
That's quite interesting, Pak Faisal. I take your time for one question. So if you say one of the ethic of the mediator should be impartial, how you can ask the understanding from the parties when you meet one from US, one from Indonesia, while you know if you have a discussion with the Indonesian, you have to keep smiling, but in another spot, the US also see at the same time that you have a different face to him. How you balance about it?
Would I be able to answer that? Maybe not completely, but
sure.
My opinion. I think what Raymond said, it is very often the case when you are conducting international mediations and you do have, in fact, two different cultures, two different legal systems, and two different social behaviors. So as a mediator, we have, as you said, family the responsibility to be impartial, but also to be seen as impartial. So if you have a case that involves two different cultures, you need to do your homework beforehand. You need to understand the cultures of both parties and inform yourself as much as possible in order to prepare the environment of mediation, which is the fundamental task of a mediator. So your job as a mediator is to create this environment where the parties can speak freely and honestly, and therefore can develop options for the resolution of the dispute. So if you don't understand these nuances of different cultures, then obviously you cannot create this environment. I will say that also in many of my cases, I have been even gone to the trouble of learning some phrases or words in that particular language, because in my view, that also helps the parties to feel more comfortable. Sometimes it brings smiles to my clients because I obviously cannot speak perfect, every language in the world, but it demonstrates the respect that you have for that particular culture. In a very, very difficult mediation I had, I even learned how to sing a song in Swahili. And you might say, well, that's going a little bit too far, but as a mediator, sometimes you have to use these different tools that you have at your disposal to assist the parties to resolve the dispute. So it is very important that as a mediator, you prepare yourself. It is your homework. Before you even go into the mediation, you have to learn as much as possible about the different cultures that you're gonna be having in that mediation.
Faisal, I have a sincere request that we close with a Swahili song.
This is an example that in the digital age, if in mediation we understand the concept of a co-mediator, in digital age we need co-moderator. All right, thank you so much, Papami. Okay, I'm a bit, thinking about we have the term of commercial, and then we have the term of culture, and then in conflict they get mixed, to each other. And but just curious, if we go back to the what we call the basic dispute is a commercial dispute. Commercial dispute is a money dispute. Now, if we put the element of culture, the ingredient of culture into the money dispute, does it really change the equations? In a very simple term, isn't that in the commercial dispute, money will rule the resolution? Culture is like, money is the main dish, culture is just a side dish. What do you think? Who wants to go? Danny?
Yeah, okay. Yes, you often hear parties, especially if they don't have experience of mediation, and obviously that can happen. They will say things like, look, this case is just about the money.
Mm.
You can forget about emotion. You can forget about culture. Mediator, don't worry about that. It's all about business. This is just purely about the dollars. Okay. And I nod my head very politely. I say, I see, but I do not accept that at all, because my experience tells me, and the experience of most mediators who do international cases or commercial cases, that is simply not true. Where there are human beings, there is emotion. Where there are human beings, there is culture. Because as Delcy was talking about earlier, and Raymond, we are all multicultural layers. If you say to me, are you Australian? I will say, yes, I can pass a lie detector test on that. If you say to me, are you Irish? I can say yes, and I will pass the lie detector, you know. So I have different, and apart from that, I have other layers too. But the real thing about it is culture can affect commercial mediation, the ones that are just about the money, in different ways. As a mediator, I need to explore with the parties what happened to cause the dispute. Because sometimes to resolve the dispute, you have to go back to the cause of the dispute, especially with Asian parties. They want to talk about how the relationship broke down. Now, a party from Germany, for example, is not really interested so much on that. They want to talk about the contract. They want to talk about the money right now. But so sometimes the problem was miscommunication due to the culture that caused the dispute in the first place, but not always. Culture is not always the problem. However, if you then look at how culture can affect the mediation process itself, as a mediator, if I want to be able to assist the parties, I need to be able to communicate clearly with them and help them to talk to each other. That's what I'm doing, communication. My mother once asked me, Danny, when I was a lawyer, she knew what a lawyer was. She was very proud of her son being a lawyer. When I told her I was going to be a mediator, she was very disappointed in me. She says, you're not going to be a lawyer anymore? I said, I'm still a lawyer, Mom. You know, I'm still a lawyer, but I'm going to be a mediator. She said, what does a mediator do? She wants to tell her friends what her son is doing. And I said, well, Mom, I help people to talk to each other. So as the mediator during a mediation, I need to understand the cultural differences to help them to talk to each other. Okay,
so your view that this is an important ingredient, because we need to look at the root of the problem, and is it money or is it culture? It could be because of the cultural issue, and it goes to the money issues. I want to go to Raymond, and then after that to Delcy. I mean, what we heard from Danny, there is a what we call the connection between the two, and the culture plays an important role as well. In your experience, Raymond, have you seen a situation where if we ignore the cultural complexity, and sometimes one person will end up paying more instead of if that person understands the culture. Actually, if we go with the trajectory of the transaction, is it, okay, I'm gonna pay more as long as we don't talk about this small little thing. What are your view on that, Raymond?
Thank you, Faisal. So yeah, the answer in short is yes. And I think Danny said that we are emotional beings. And if you look at the science of negotiation, likability is critical to getting a better deal. If the other party likes you, they're much more likely to do a better deal than if they hate you. If you have offended them, insulted them directly or inadvertently, it's going to make a difference. So yeah, so that's backed by science, that empathy, likability. In Indonesia, I call it enakness, being enak, which means comfortable or delicious, so being delicious. And creating that relationship you'll always get a better deal, I believe. But I may be wrong.
Okay, so good relationship will lead to a better deal. That's where the element of culture.
Well, let me elaborate. Good relationship or handling, being sensitive to how you communicate bad news from one culture to another. Something I'm discussing with my Indonesian colleagues, and we came to the conclusion that do it in a nice smiling way over a great dinner, you know, as opposed to sitting over a formal table and say, you haven't, so like the Western banker will say, yeah, but they're not paying me. Why am I going to take them out to dinner? And the answer, in a good restaurant.
Right.
I'll take them out to McDonald's. And the answer is because you need to keep the relationship. Otherwise, they will work to undermine you in every way they can and be uncooperative in every way they can. But if you can keep a friend, because I think you have to get to the core in the West, and in many countries in the West, not, I mean, America particularly is very, there's a complete separation between a business relationship and a friendship. Often. You can have a very close business relationship, but really never want to see each other on a friendship basis. As I understand it from my colleagues, you perhaps can confirm this, Faisal, because you've done a lot of this dealing. You can't separate them here in Asia. Yeah. Right. If you're not friends with someone, you can't do business with them. If the friendship's not there, if the relationship's not there. Tell me if I'm off the map here.
No, I think I'm going to ask Delcy about that. What do you think, Delcy, on your observation? I mean, you've been exposed to many things, and even I want to ask you on this environmental. You mentioned about mediating the environmental issues as well. I don't know whether that will have a different setting, but relationship and business, culture and conflict, money, whether the culture complexity can prevent the agreement on the money issue. What do you think, Delcy?
Well, I have to agree with Danny that in my experience, I don't think that any of my cases, international cases, have been only about money. They have never been only about money. And the reason being, again, as my colleagues have said rightly, is because even behind a huge corporation, you have people. So you're not dealing with a building and another building. You are dealing with corporations represented by people like you and me. So the more you understand where they are coming from, the better environment you can set up so that people can discuss, can talk to each other. Now, in terms of why people would like to, for example, use mediation to resolve these cross-border, commercial, international, whatever disputes, specifically for commercial disputes, people develop relationships, just like Raymond was talking about. And business relationships are as important as our personal relationships. So when there are two companies doing business, it has not developed in a week or in a month. It takes sometimes years to develop trust and to develop a commercial relationship. So you don't want to terminate that commercial relationship abruptly or through a process that adjudicates and you become one a loser and the other a winner. So mediation provides for an environment where that relationship, that commercial relationship, can be restored or can be preserved. And I think that is the important part of what we are discussing about the cultural aspect of the mediation, that if you don't understand how important it is, then it is very difficult for you as a mediator to assist your clients. And in terms of the environmental disputes, and you can put it in any setting in reality, it was so difficult for me to understand because I was working with indigenous communities. And not one, but there were a number of them. And each of them had their own cultural identities. So then you bring a corporation, a foreign corporation. And then how do you do that without learning about these two different cultures and what is the effect of these different behaviors into the dispute? Was it a misunderstanding? Was it a cultural issue there? Was it a language issue? So you have to, try to prepare yourself for these kind of things. And I will put it probably for later on also the discussion of interpreters. Okay. How do you successfully use interpreters in this setting? Because obviously, like Danny, he's a magician with languages, but most of us do not speak many languages, but you have to still work in that international environment. And so I have to use, for example, interpreters, and I have to learn how to work successfully with them. And so that's maybe another topic, but also of importance. As a mediator, you need to learn how to work with interpreters.
Okay, so that's interesting because we mentioned about the corporate and the indigenous people. The corporate itself having its own culture, the corporate culture. And then this is like we have a social culture, we have corporate culture, and then in the middle, suddenly we have a language barrier, which complicate the whole thing because now the term of missing in translation could also complicate the mediation process. Thank you so much. I'm going to check to the PMN team whether we have the top 3 question has been selected already.
Yeah.
Okay, can we put on the screen?
Firstly, is a practical question. If we have one party, foreign party, one Indonesian party, and we as a mediator being chosen, we are Indonesian mediator, how to conduct the preparation, the research, how to know the appropriate setting, how to know. As Delcy mentioned that we have to prepare the understanding of the setting, but how you do it usually? The first question. And the second question is whether the culture affect a quantum of outcome. I think indirectly has been responded by Pak Raymond in Indonesia, but we don't know in other cultural setting. And thirdly, in the family mediation. In the family mediation, if we have a different citizen between the parties, the mediator will do investigation of the cultural differences to understand the character of the parties. So I think in this question, she include culture and character of the parties. how to prepare on those kind of issues.
Okay, so if I may recap a little bit, some of the question has been discussed previously about whether it had affect the outcome or not. But I think what is interesting is the question is there about how do I know what type of culture they have? You know, they got like two parties. One is from Germany, the other one maybe from China or not Indonesia, another one from what we call Australia. How do we know what culture that people have, what culture of both parties have? Any thought from three of you? Anyone will start? Raymond, want to start?
Oh, thank you, Fahmi. I would recommend, but it's a cost issue, that you have two mediators, one from each culture. Even although I am from the UK and reasonably fluent in Indonesia, if I'm doing a case here with an Indonesian party, I always prefer to have an Indonesian colleague with me, because even I may miss a subtlety, misunderstand something, or misunderstand a joke could go wrong. All sorts of things can go wrong. And having one way is to have two mediators, one from each culture, who know how to work together and can communicate very well, because you don't want a communication problem between the mediators. That would be one suggestion.
Raymond, I'm going to jump a little bit there about two mediators. Am I correct to assume that having two mediators also could represent the prevention of the mistrust of one party, because it's being represented by only, you know, one mediator, which is representing their culture?
I can't say for sure, but if I put myself in the position of a foreign businessman who doesn't speak the language, dealing with an Indonesian party and an Indonesian mediator, say, I would certainly feel more comfortable if there's someone from my country or someone who speaks from Europe as a co-mediator.
I see, because from your explanation that because the moment the mediator speaking the same language with one of the party that the other party does not understand what they are talking about, that is already create another dimension of trust. Yeah,
I think it's very important to remember that anybody in conflict is in a high state of paranoia. They will always assume the most negative thing is going on and connect things in their mind which are unrelated and think there's a conspiracy going on. Very likely.
They said that when people in conflict, they bring everything into the table except trust. So, Danny, what do you think about the question? And also after that, I'll go to Delcy. What do you think about how do we investigate or understand the culture of the parties?
Yeah, well, I think my colleagues will agree with this. Pre-mediation contact is so important. Preparation, pre-mediation contact. When I mediate in Hong Kong, I'm very lucky. It's a small place. I can actually go to the lawyers' offices and have pre-mediation meetings separately before. When I was in Australia, I couldn't do this, and I couldn't do it in the UK because of various reasons, so often done on the telephone. This now, of course, we can use Zoom and things like that. So pre-mediation is when I find out. I think I liked Delcy's term. She said setting up the right environment. So that's part of it. Pre-mediation, I need to work at setting up the right environment for the mediation, understanding not just the culture but the personalities of the parties. And really, what do they want? Don't tell me the figures, I don't want to know. But, you know, what do they hope to get out of it? Language and neutrality is very important. It needs careful handling. For instance, I did a case, I think last year, where I had a Japanese party on one side and a Western party on the other. And the Japanese party was saying, we were happy to get you as our mediator, and I said, oh, I said, thank you very much. And later on, I don't ask before, when they settle, I don't ask questions before. When they settle, I said, by the way, how did you, they said, we chose you because you can speak Mandarin. I said, but you speak Japanese, so I can't speak Japanese. Konnichiwa, Toyota, Suzuki, you know, that's all I can say in Japanese. And they said, yes, but we thought you would understand Asian culture. But it is important, though, if I'm speaking Mandarin with one party and the other party is thinking Danny is on their side. So I have to be very upfront. That is why, as a mediator, I never, sometimes on a small dispute, but I never interpret myself. I ask each party to bring their own interpreter. One little tip for young Indonesian lawyers that are listening: be careful. Don't become the interpreter. I will share, this would be my advice, especially if you are female, because then they will forget you are a lawyer and start treating you like an interpreter, which can be a problem later on when you want to get involved as a lawyer. So people sometimes, to save money, they get, you know, Miss Lee from the office, who's a lawyer who speaks Chinese or speaks Japanese, but then the parties start to, you know, so be careful of that. Sometimes, Raymond made the point, is we build what we call rapport, which is we build understanding, so we can develop trust with the parties. That's very important later in the mediation. Sometimes, though, I will actually downplay the connectivity, the connection I have with the parties. I did a case in Hong Kong where we had a big franchisor, came from America. I won't mention the name. You all eat there all the time, I'm sure. So a big franchisor, they came to speak to a franchisee in Hong Kong. The franchisee was Australian. That was very simple. He was English, but Australian. And he had 2 staff members. And during the conversation, during the mediation, I realized both of the staff members were from Australia too. And they were, although they were Chinese, ethnic Chinese, and they were also from the same city where I have my home in Australia. So I deliberately did not talk about Australia until we settled.
I see.
Because I did not want the Americans to get the impression, oh, Danny keeps talking to the Aussie guys about Australia, so he must have a very close connectivity with them. So it's a balancing act that, as mediators, it's very subtle, but that's one of the factors, I think, to maintain a neutrality that we try to, I think, pay attention to.
Thank you, Danny. I'll go to Delcy, and if you do you have any ways of how to really grasp the culture differences quickly? What would be your usual quote-unquote trick in mastering the culture differences? Please.
Well, the simple answer is there's nothing quick in this.
No instant.
It takes quite a bit of effort and commitment and time to understand these things. And obviously, you'll make mistakes. And that's how we learn in this business, by making mistakes. And so after some 26 years or something, then you kind of start talking about how things need to be done. But I think it's important to recognize that these things are so important that you have to be prepared. And I think one of the questions is, how do you prepare? And I think Danny articulated it very well. And I do the same thing through pre-mediations. I never actually conduct a mediation without having met each party separately for some time to understand what this dispute is about for them. And that pre-mediation, you have an opportunity to obviously learn the culture. Are there any language issues? Are there any character issues? Are there any personality issues? Are there any communication challenges that the parties have? All these is provided in that pre-mediation session. And I think many mediators just jump in there, and I really admire them. I don't know how they do this, you know, that they just go directly into the mediation. I couldn't do it. If I want to conduct a mediation that it is gonna be an environment where I'm gonna create an environment that it is supportive for the parties, then I have to know them in advance. Because you put yourself in the position of a party in a dispute, and then you are gonna be talking about very important issues. And I think somebody asked about family mediations as well. You know, how do you differentiate the parties, the cultures or the character? You have to do it through this pre-mediation session, because there you have an opportunity to make an assessment. As a mediator, you have to know how you can use the different tools that you have. I always call it your toolkit. You have different things that you use as a mediator, depending on the parties and depending on the case. So if you really want to be helping the parties, you have to do this pre-mediation. You have to. And another thing that I want to mention is about this, Danny mentioned neutrality. I rather call it impartiality. I know they are different, but I'm more inclined to call it impartiality, that you have to not only be impartial, but you have to be perceived by the parties to be impartial. And this is what Danny and Raymond are saying too. It's not just about, oh, I'm really impartial in this case, but are the parties seeing you as an impartial person?
So being impartial, because that will create the what we call the perception of the party, whether they can